The Falkirk Triangle is a place in Scotland where UFO sightings are so common that it is called the UFO capital of the world. It doesn't have the branding of Roswell. It doesn't have the barbed wire and desert lore of Area 51. But per capita, it leaves both of them in the dust. In fact, by numbers, this one quiet patch of central Scotland has more UFO reports than anywhere else on Earth. Since the early 1990s, more than 3,000 sightings have been logged here. We're talking about a consistent stream of eyewitness reports from a relatively tiny area with a population that could barely fill a football stadium. And these aren't vague kinds of stories either. These are people describing solid craft, triangles, discs, orbs, moving in ways that defy the laws of physics. This is nothing but a true life story of the Falkirk Triangle. Now, there's a tendency to roll your eyes when someone says UFO. You picture conspiracy theorists with tinfoil hats or old grainy photos of flying saucers. But the stories from Falkirk don't come from the fringe. They come from teachers, police officers, postal workers, and retirees. People with no reason to lie, and everything to lose by sounding crazy. Over and over again, they describe the same thing. A large black triangle, 3 lights. No sound, it hovers. Then it vanishes. Sometimes it moves slowly, almost gliding. Other times it zips off at speeds no known aircraft can match. People have seen these things from their bedrooms, from their cars, or while walking their dogs. There have also been reports of these crafts following people or hovering just above a car roof for several miles, or just stopping in place when someone gets out to look. These aren't just visuals, they are interactions. But they rarely get reported, and when they do, they usually go nowhere. It's enough to make you wonder if these sightings are just the surface of something much deeper. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Right now, we're just standing in a cold field in what they call the Triangle. But there are no fences, no signs, no warnings. Just a stretch of quiet Scottish countryside that doesn't behave the way it should. Draw a line on a map from Bonnybridge to Falkirk, then up to Stirling, and back again. That's the Falkirk Triangle. But the space in between? That's where it gets strange. There are fields that seem to stretch forever, forests that swallow sound, crumbling stone walls, ancient footpaths, and sudden eerie clearings that feel older than the map itself. Even before the modern sightings exploded in the early 1990s, strange things were happening here. Local stories go back generations, like the shepherd who woke up miles from where he had fallen asleep, with no memory of walking. Children who saw people made of light near the river. Objects in the sky that moved like birds but cast no shadow, made no sound and left no trail. But it wasn't until the 90s that it all came to a head. That's when the reports started piling up. At first, just a few. A family saw lights hovering above their garden. A truck driver described a metallic object pacing his vehicle along the M80. A woman walking her dog swore she saw a massive black triangle glide across the moonlit sky, so low she could see the surface ripple like liquid. Just these few. And then, before anyone knew it, it was everywhere. Craft, lights, noise without cause, movement without logic. Not just once. Over and over, the sightings didn't follow any pattern that made sense except one. Location. It all happened inside the Falkirk Triangle. So what exactly is inside the Falkirk Triangle? Why do these crafts, if that's what they are, seem to appear here more than anywhere else? Is there something about the land, the magnetic field, or is it something about choosing this place? Others note the proximity of radar stations, old RAF airfields, and Cold War facilities. Could this be a secret testing zone, an airborne illusion, something man-made but not meant for public eyes? Still others think the opposite, that it's not military, not folklore, not madness, but something entirely outside our understanding, and it's been here longer than we have. Basically, no one knows the answer. The Falkirk Triangle can't be explained, and if the triangle itself can't be explained, maybe the only way to understand it is to go deeper. Because the next story, the one that changed the way people looked at the Falkirk mystery forever, didn't just involve lights in the sky. It was a warm summer night, August 27th, 1992, when Gary Wood and Colin Wright set off on a routine drive that would turn into one of the most chilling and detailed alien abduction cases in British history. The two men, longtime friends, were headed from Edinburgh to the small town of Tarbrax to deliver a satellite television system to a friend. Gary, an ambulance driver, was behind the wheel. Colin, an engineer, sat in the passenger seat. It was about 10 p.m. when they merged onto the A70, a dark rural road cutting through the isolated Scottish countryside. No traffic, no lights, just the hum of tyres on asphalt and the blackness of the woods pressing in from either side. Roughly 15 miles into their journey, near the Harperig Reservoir, the stillness broke. Hovering ahead of them, suspended above the road, was a large metallic disc. Gary later described it as a two-tiered saucer with a rotating rim and glowing lights underneath. The craft wasn't making a sound, it just hung there impossibly still, blocking their path. They didn't stop. Gary gripped the wheel tightly and pushed forward, intent on driving under it. As they approached, a sudden flash of brilliant white light engulfed the car. Then everything went dark, just silence. When the two men came back, they were stunned to find themselves several hundred yards further down the road from where the craft had been. But something was wrong. Their bodies felt heavy, their heads buzzed with confusion. Gary's hands trembled as he gripped the wheel. Colin looked sick. There was an overwhelming sense of disorientation, like stepping back into your body after a blackout. Then they checked the clock. 90 minutes had vanished. They had no memory of what happened. The trip should have taken about 30 minutes total. Instead, they arrived in Tarbrax shaken, pale, and deeply unsettled, 2 hours late. But it wasn't just time they lost. Over the following days, both men reported bizarre physical symptoms. Gary developed a rash on his torso. Colin had recurring headaches and vivid nightmares, dreams of being restrained, surrounded by light, and watched by blank faces. Neither man was known for flights of imagination. Gary was a respected ambulance driver. Colin was reserved, skeptical, and analytical. Both tried to put the incident behind them. They didn't want publicity. They didn't even tell their friends. But the fear stuck. Eventually, unable to sleep and desperate for answers, they sought help from a hypnotherapist familiar with trauma. What surfaced next was the stuff of pure science fiction, or pure nightmare, depending on how you look at it. Under hypnosis, both men recounted an identical story. They said the blinding flash wasn't just light, it was a pull. The car was no longer on the road. Somehow they had been lifted, transported, taken inside the craft. Inside they were separated. Both described being paralyzed but aware, lying on a cold table in a dimly lit, metallic room. Strange figures surrounded them. Not the classic greys, but humanoid beings, tall, thin, with elongated heads and large obsidian eyes. Their movements were clinical, emotionless. The men were examined, prodded. Gary recalled a device hovering over his chest that seemed to scan him with vibrating energy. Colin described a strange fluid being placed in his mouth that triggered visions, apocalyptic ones. He saw images of Earth scorched by fire, cities flooded, and children crying beside collapsed buildings. He felt as if he were being shown humanity's future. Then it stopped, and the next thing they could see was that they woke up back in their car, driving down the A70, with no memory of the ordeal until hypnosis brought it to the surface. Now here's where things get even stranger. The men didn't go public with their story until months later, when Scottish UFO researcher Malcolm Robinson caught wind of the case. He had heard hundreds of UFO tales, but this one stood out. The details matched too precisely. The hypnosis tapes were chilling, and the men refused any payment or publicity. They just wanted to be left alone. Robinson called it the most credible alien abduction in Scotland, and the case was dubbed Scotland's Roswell by local press. Media outlets picked it up. TV crews came knocking. For a short time, the A70 incident was a national curiosity. But Gary and Colin weren't celebrating. They had no interest in being UFO celebrities. In fact, they almost regretted coming forward. They lost friends. They were mocked. Gary's career took a hit. People whispered that he'd gone off the deep end, and yet they never recanted, never changed their story. To this day, both men insist that what they experienced was real, not a dream or a hallucination. Something took them. Something wanted to show them something, and that something, whatever it was, hasn't left them. Since the A70 incident, other people, dozens by some counts, have come forward with eerily similar stories. encounters along the same road, lights in the sky, sudden time loss, visions of environmental catastrophe. The pattern is unmistakable and eerily scary. From 1992 to the late 1990s, Bonnybridge became the unlikely epicenter of a phenomenon that was impossible to ignore. Every year, over 300 separate sightings were logged in the area. That's nearly one per day. And these weren't vague flickers in the distance or the occasional flare mistaken for a flying saucer. These were low-altitude, close-range, multi-witness events. Some lasted minutes, some left marks. Others left the witnesses changed forever. And they came from everywhere. One of the earliest high-profile reports came from Tharston in South Norfolk by Mr. Chatton, who worked at J.A. Lammas cycling home. He said he saw a ship that was 400 feet long, rapidly moving towards Norwich. He could not hear any motor. On the same day, another was seen at Wroxham in Norfolk. Some days later, a 30-foot wide saucer-shaped object was seen to hover a few feet above a street in broad daylight by Margaret Fry and her doctor on a very hot, cloudless day. Car engines nearby stalled. It was seen by around 30 people and made a humming noise, and landed at the junction of Ashbourne Road and Whitfield Road. It hovered over Bedenwell Primary School for around 1 minute before finally shooting off into the sky. Then the police got involved when, in the early morning, a rotating UFO was seen over the Wash by Skegness and Boston police officer David Leyland and picked up by Claxby ATC radar. Now, these weren't conspiracy theorists or fringe believers. These were normal people just going about their day. Heck, skeptics of stories like this. But even they knew that what they were seeing didn't make sense. And the reports kept piling up. A nurse walking home at night said a glowing orb followed her along the canal path for nearly 10 minutes. A family of 4 camping near Carron Valley Reservoir claimed they saw a disc-shaped object rise out of the water before vanishing into the clouds. A delivery driver dropping off parcels at 4 a.m. said his van engine died just as a triangular craft passed overhead. It restarted on its own the moment it disappeared. Some witnesses even claimed the lights weren't just in the sky, but in their homes. Strange flickering orbs, electrical devices powering on by themselves, pets reacting to things that weren't there, to the point that the line between UFO and paranormal began to blur. By 1995, the phenomenon was too big to ignore. Bonnybridge had become Scotland's answer to Roswell. Except instead of a single crash, it was an ongoing event. Journalists swarmed the town. UFO investigators from across Europe set up base. Bonnybridge's name became shorthand for the unexplainable. It's one thing to see lights in the sky. Even strange shapes, discs, triangles, orbs can be explained away by experimental aircraft, drones, weather, or wishful thinking. But it's something entirely different when people start seeing them. Because the witnesses aren't just describing objects anymore. They're describing beings. And not just any beings. Not the kind you can wave away with a shrug and a telescope. These are creatures that defy logic, physics, and frankly, our sense of safety in the world. They appear without warning. They vanish without a trace. And in some cases they leave something behind, not evidence, but scars. On the body and on the mind. Over the next few years, dozens of locals described seeing entities. Some tall and glowing, others thin, grey-skinned with large heads and jet-black eyes. But these weren't always isolated incidents. Sometimes they seemed to precede sightings of craft, as if the beings were scouts, showing up ahead of the lights in the sky. In other cases, the figures would appear in dreams, vivid, disturbing, and often recurring. Some people had dreams where they were floating, some had dreams where they examined, and some were spoken to, but not in words, but through overwhelming impressions and images via telepathy. So what is going on here? Now, some investigators proposed the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, the idea that these beings aren't from another planet, but another dimension, or another frequency of reality that occasionally bleeds into ours. They may be native to Earth in a way we don't yet understand. Not visitors, but permanent residents, just hidden from our limited senses. Others suggest they're manifestations of consciousness itself, projections, psychological phenomena that take form when certain people are exposed to trauma, fear, or the unknown. That would explain the dream encounters, the emotional intensity, the lack of physical evidence. But it doesn't explain how multiple people see the same thing at the same time, or how some witnesses walk away with physical marks, unexplained bruises, burns, or scars. Behind the scenes, researchers began to uncover strange patterns. Many of the UFOs seemed to appear around specific waterways, reservoirs, canals and locks. Others were spotted near military installations, including bases long rumoured to house classified technology. Witnesses described seeing military jets scramble toward UFOs, only for the unknown craft to vanish before they got close. In one documented case, a family driving near Bonnybridge saw what they described as a floating, metallic triangle, about the size of a bus. They pulled over to get a better look. Within minutes, 2 fighter jets screamed overhead, and the triangle zipped away at impossible speed. To some, this was proof of a military connection. To others, it was evidence that the military wasn't in control at all. As the 90s progressed, sightings began to evolve. More triangles, more cigars, but now with added phenomena, missing time, physical symptoms and psychological effects. Some locals described recurring dreams of a craft hovering above their homes. Others reported nosebleeds, fatigue and heightened anxiety following sightings. And yet, despite the scale of it all, no formal investigation was ever launched. No official statement, no scientific inquiry. The people of Bonnybridge were left with a pile of questions, a stack of local newspaper clippings, and a growing sense that they were witnessing something historic and being told to look the other way. So if the stories are real, then what are we looking at? Are these alien visitors, secret military projects, mass hallucinations? Or are we dealing with something older, stranger, and much harder to explain? It's easy to get caught up in the lights, the shapes, the sightings, but what if the answer isn't up in the sky? What if it's down here? That's the theory gaining traction among some of the more grounded Falkirk Triangle researchers, that the objects spotted across the region, especially those eerily silent pitch-black triangles, aren't alien at all. They're military. Not just observed by the military, operated by them. Because if you zoom out on a map of central Scotland, something strange comes into focus. The Falkirk Triangle, with Bonnybridge at its heart, is surrounded by sensitive locations. To the north, the Stirling military base. To the east, the Kirk Newton airfield, once a World War II RAF station, now largely off limits. And not far south, in the outskirts of Edinburgh, lies the Royal Navy's Rosyth dockyard, historically tied to nuclear submarine maintenance. Layer that with Cold War history, and you've got a potential testing corridor. Quiet, rural, with access to airspace and infrastructure that isn't exactly easy to monitor from the outside. Suddenly, the hundreds of sightings of strange triangular craft seem a little less otherworldly and a little more like top-secret trial runs, especially when you look at the TR-3B theory. The TR-3B, officially non-existent, unofficially everywhere, is a rumoured US black project aircraft. Its most common description is a large black, triangular craft capable of hovering silently, accelerating instantly, and flying without visible means of propulsion. Witnesses claim it moves in ways that defy current physics. Impossible turns, sudden vertical jumps, seamless glides. Sound familiar? The TR-3B is said to use a form of electromagnetic propulsion, sometimes referred to as anti-gravity technology. It's not powered by conventional engines, but by exotic physics, rotating plasma, gravitational field disruption, vacuum manipulation. Of course, officially, it doesn't exist. But if it did, and if it were being tested in Allied airspace, the UK would be the logical place. And a quiet slice of Scotland, nestled far from major cities but close enough to air bases and deep sea ports, would be ideal, remote enough to be unnoticed, populated enough to gather real-world data on visibility, radar response and public reaction. In other words, the perfect test zone. So we've some people saying that even though they agree with what people saw, it could be human-made. And there's more. During the Cold War, NATO and the US conducted dozens of secret tests over British skies, without informing Parliament or the public. From chemical dispersal experiments to classified aircraft trials, these activities were often conducted under the nose of the average citizen, and they weren't always harmless. But here's where this theory starts to unravel, or twist into something more sinister. If these are black project aircraft, what about the abductions? The beings, the missing time, the radiation burns? Because that's where the military theory starts to raise uncomfortable questions. Could the abduction phenomena themselves be part of the test? Could technologies being developed, neural interference, psychological manipulation, and directed energy be used on civilians as part of data collection? Because this is not science fiction, that's history. I am not saying could it be them, I am more like asking could it be them again? Keyword on again, because this has happened before. In the 1950s and 60s, the US and UK both ran mind control research projects such as MK Ultra, Project Artichoke, Sub-Project 54, where civilians were subjected to experiments involving LSD, trauma, sleep deprivation, and hypnosis. All without consent, all in secret. Now imagine that level of experimentation, only updated with 21st century tech. There are abduction accounts near Falkirk that describe hallucinogenic states, paralysis, missing time, memory interference, and unfamiliar machinery. Those details don't just fit alien narratives, they also align disturbingly well with classified military technologies developed for non-lethal crowd control, pilot testing, and even remote behavioural modification. One incident from 1996 involved a man who woke up in the middle of a field, unable to move, while 3 glowing orbs circled overhead. He said he felt like his body didn't belong to him. Medical scans later showed an unexplained burn mark on his chest, matching no known injury pattern. Could this be evidence of radiation exposure, or exposure to a high-frequency directed energy weapon being tested for warfare application? The military explanation may solve one part of the puzzle, but it opens a darker, more complicated one in its place. But not everything adds up. Some of the objects reported in Falkirk move in ways that defy even the most advanced aviation theories. Instant acceleration, mid-air stops, right-angle turns at high speeds, no sonic booms, no propulsion trails, no known physics. Even the most aggressive black project enthusiast has to admit, if that tech exists, it's decades ahead of anything we've admitted to. While we contemplate on this, let's take a look at the second theory, that is as old as time itself. And honestly, for both our sakes, I sincerely hope this theory is wrong. Ancient land, ancient powers. Long before anyone called it the Falkirk Triangle, before there were reports of glowing orbs, silent black craft, or tall beings that drifted through dreams, this land was already known for something strange, something sacred. Because for as long as stories have been told in Scotland, the area between Bonnybridge, Falkirk and Stirling has had a reputation, not for UFOs, but for something older, deeper, and just as unexplainable. Think Lovecraftian horror. In Celtic folklore, this part of the country was known as a place where the veil between worlds wore thin. A place of thin places where this world and the next touched so closely that sometimes they bled into one another. The land itself seems to hold memory. Look at the map and it starts to form a pattern. Dotted across the landscape are standing stones, ancient burial mounds and stone circles, some over 5,000 years old. They weren't placed randomly. Many align with celestial bodies, the movements of the sun, moon and stars. Some theorists believe they acted like markers or even portals, built at the crossroads of energy lines, known today as ley lines. Ley lines are a controversial concept, but the idea is simple. Certain ancient sites around the world line up with eerie precision. The Nazca lines, Stonehenge, the Great Pyramids. Some believe these alignments aren't accidental, that they trace natural currents of Earth energy, like a spiritual grid beneath our feet. And in the case of the Falkirk Triangle, those lines converge. This is a landscape that doesn't just sit still, it hums. To the ancient Celts, these weren't just stones and mounds, they were entrances, doorways to the otherworld. In Scottish myth, the otherworld was home to what's known as the Fae folk, not the glittering fairies of children's books, but ancient, mysterious beings that were often feared as much as they were revered. Descriptions of these beings, when you really break them down, sound disturbingly familiar. They weren't human. They could appear or vanish at will. They stole people away, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. Those who returned often had no memory of where they'd been. Others came back changed, sick, confused, or speaking in riddles. Sound familiar? Modern UFO abductees report missing time, illness, visions, strange dreams, and the deep lingering feeling of having been taken somewhere they can't describe. But swap the spaceship for a stone circle, and you've got the same story. is not just a coincidence. In 1969, folklorist and author Jacques Vallée, one of the first serious UFO researchers, proposed something radical, that the UFO phenomenon might not be alien at all. He believed it was a modern expression of something much older, a kind of recurring pattern in human history. What we call aliens today, our ancestors called gods, spirits, or fairies. The form changes, but the experience stays the same. And the deeper you go into Scottish folklore, the more the parallels show up. There are tales of fairy abductions going back centuries. In these stories, someone is lured away, sometimes by a light, sometimes by a song, and taken to the other side. When they return, they've aged differently. Time has passed oddly. They carry vague memories of being examined, or shown visions, or given a message they can't quite explain. In the 17th century, a woman named Isabel Gowdy confessed, under torture, to being taken by the Fae. She described glowing beings, impossible lights, and flying through the air. She wasn't describing crop circles or flying saucers, but you could take her testimony, change a few nouns, and it would sound just like an alien abduction in 1996. Then there's the Fae taboo. To speak of them invites their attention. To deny them is dangerous. People were taught to treat them with caution, to leave offerings, to stay away from their sacred places, especially the stone circles. Which brings us back to the Falkirk Triangle. Many of the modern sightings, the craft, the orbs, the entities, occur within walking distance of ancient sites. The Ardok Roman Fort, the Callander Woods, the Carron Valley, all places with layered history, where Iron Age hill forts, Neolithic burial cairns, and Roman roads sit on top of each other like palimpsests of memory. There are even caves nearby rumoured to have been used by druids, priests who believed the land itself was alive, conscious, and connected to the stars. Some researchers believe these sites function like amplifiers, heightening whatever strangeness is already baked into the land. Maybe Falkirk Triangle isn't just a random hotspot, but a living relic, a place where ancient rituals, energies, and intelligences have been brushing up against human reality for millennia. And now, in the age of satellites and smartphones, we're glimpsing the same phenomenon, but through the lens of modern science fiction. In other words, we're not discovering aliens, we're rediscovering folklore. But if the land holds memory, if it's been speaking for centuries, then why has the government spent decades pretending not to hear it? Why do key reports vanish? Why are the people of Falkirk still waiting for an answer no one wants to give? The silence from the top. When the skies over Bonnybridge lit up night after night in the 1990s, when triangle-shaped crafts hovered without a sound, when teachers, police officers and families came forward with stories of orbs, entities and missing time, there was one man who refused to shrug and look away. Billy Buchanan, a local councillor and lifelong Falkirk resident, did what no one else dared. He demanded answers. He didn't just rant on talk radio or write letters to the editor. He petitioned Parliament again and again. 15 times, over the course of a decade, Buchanan formally asked the British government and the Ministry of Defence to investigate the wave of sightings in and around the Falkirk Triangle. Each time he was met with the same carefully worded brush-off. The Ministry of Defence had no interest in the sightings because they posed no defence significance. But that response didn't sit right with Buchanan, or with the hundreds of residents who had personally seen things in the sky they couldn't explain. If it wasn't the military, then who was flying these craft? If it wasn't a threat, then why were the reports so consistent, so widespread and so physically close to key infrastructure and military installations? And here's where it starts to get suspicious. Because while the MOD publicly dismissed UFOs as non-threatening, internally they were tracking them. Declassified files released under the UK's Freedom of Information Act have revealed that the ministry did keep detailed records of UFO encounters for decades, including several near Falkirk, radar reports, pilot testimony, even instances where unidentified objects caused interference with military equipment. But instead of launching a proper investigation or acknowledging public concern, the MOD chose silence. Or worse, disinformation. Some files from the 90s, now partially redacted, show sightings that match the exact shape, flight path, and behaviour of the triangles seen over Bonnybridge. But the documents end abruptly. Whole pages are missing, names blacked out, no conclusions, no follow-up. When questioned in Parliament, the MOD stuck to its favourite line: "We no longer investigate sightings unless they pose a threat to national airspace." That's a convenient loophole, because as long as no one in uniform labels it a threat, the government can act as though nothing is happening. Even if fighter jets are scrambled, even if radar shows something was there, even if citizens report effects like radiation burns or missing time. To Buchanan and many others, this isn't just negligence, it's a cover-up. But why? Some say that the UK is under pressure from the United States, specifically the Pentagon and its black budget intelligence network. After all, the US has long maintained radar, surveillance and missile tracking facilities on British soil. You see, during the Cold War, the UK and the US were joined at the hip through NATO, and some say that alliance didn't end with the Soviet collapse. If anything, it deepened, becoming more secretive. Theorists argue that any credible sightings in UK airspace were and are funneled straight to US intelligence. That includes reports from RAF pilots, air traffic controllers, and even civilians near sensitive sites. The MOD plays the polite front-facing role, while the real data, radar anomalies, intercept attempts, and electromagnetic interference go across the Atlantic. Buchanan himself said in interviews that he believed the British government wasn't in charge of its own sky, and there's precedent for that. In the famous Rendlesham Forest incident of 1980, often called the British Roswell, American military personnel stationed in Suffolk reported seeing a craft land in the woods, leaving behind physical trace evidence. The UK's official position? Nothing happened. But the US immediately classified witness statements, seized photos, and left local authorities out of the loop. That case set the tone for how Britain handles UFOs. Say nothing, admit less, and let the Americans do the heavy lifting behind closed doors. I covered the story, and it was an interesting story. Luckily for us, a high-ranking officer who was there that night came out to say we were right. I'll leave the link in the description for you to watch. But it doesn't stop there, it gets darker. According to some researchers, key Falkirk-related MOD files were destroyed or removed from official archives during a routine clean-out in the early 2000s. Others were declassified, but so heavily redacted that they were functionally useless. One particularly odd case involved a 1997 radar report that showed an unknown object hovering above the Grangemouth oil refinery, one of the UK's most sensitive energy sites. The radar data was clear. The object appeared, remained stationary for 3 minutes, then shot off at speeds too fast for any known aircraft. The MOD said it couldn't confirm the object's identity and would take no further action. If that doesn't raise eyebrows, what would? In any other context, say a missile test or a foreign drone over a key infrastructure point, this would be treated as a major national security breach. But when it comes to UFOs, the script flips. Deny, dismiss, deflect. Why? One answer might be politics. If the government admits that something is flying over civilian areas, unidentified, manoeuvring with advanced capabilities, and possibly interacting with the population, then it's acknowledging a massive failure of control. If it's foreign tech, it means airspace has been breached. If it's domestic secret tech, it means they're testing it on their own people without consent. And if it's neither, well then we're all in trouble. Better then to say nothing, to let the public debate itself into exhaustion. Let the witnesses stew in isolation, the whistleblowers get ignored, the councillors like Buchanan get laughed off as local eccentrics. Because silence in this case isn't passive, it's strategic. And it works. Without official acknowledgement, there's no need for funding, oversight, or transparency. The press loses interest, the public forgets, and the mystery becomes folklore once again. But here's what the silence doesn't mean. It doesn't mean nothing is happening. In fact, it is the opposite. It means something big is happening. So big that the people in charge can't admit it without blowing up a story they've spent decades trying to contain. So while the skies above Falkirk keep lighting up, and the triangle sightings persist in low whispers on forums, in local pubs, and in late-night radio shows, the officials in charge stay quiet. Not because they don't know, but because they do. The triangle today, 30 years on, and the skies over Bonnybridge haven't gone quiet. What began as a strange rural story in the 90s, a few hundred UFO sightings a year, in a small patch of central Scotland, has now become something else entirely. A digital age enigma, fed by smartphones, drones and TikTok, but still shaped by the same impossible question. What is going on in the Falkirk Triangle? You'd think that with cameras in every pocket, we'd be closer to the truth by now, but the opposite may be happening. As sightings increase, so does noise. Blurry footage, drones mistaken for crafts, TikTok hoaxes, satellite flares, lens flares, app glitches. All of it makes real evidence harder to spot and easier to discredit. And yet some sightings still refuse to be explained away. In 2021, a motorist pulled over near Slaman and Moor after spotting a glowing red orb hovering in the trees. He filmed it on his phone, 10 seconds of crisp, shaking footage before the object blinked out. When authorities reviewed the video, they couldn't match the object to any known aircraft, drone flight plan, or astronomical event. It's now sitting in an online archive alongside hundreds of other unexplained videos from the area. Meanwhile, AI is quietly joining the investigation. A small but growing community of data analysts, programmers, and citizen scientists have started using machine learning to spot patterns in sighting reports across Scotland. They're feeding in GPS data, time of day, weather conditions, electromagnetic fluctuations, and even witness emotional states gathered through surveys. And the results? Well, that's where it gets weird. Certain hot windows seem to emerge, not just in physical space, but in time. Sightings cluster around specific lunar phases, magnetic field shift, and local seismic activity. Even more oddly, they often follow periods of heightened emotional tension, massive news events, protests, or spikes in regional stress tracked through social media sentiment analysis. It's as if the Falkirk Triangle isn't just reacting to the sky, but to us. Look, it's all crazy and confusing, even with all this information. So do I believe in the Falkirk Triangle? I sure do. When thousands of people say the same thing, the least we can do is listen. And as for the skeptic, if you still don't believe in the Falkirk Triangle, then maybe this testimony from a high-ranking officer will certainly convince you.